This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below.
So we know the Cleveland Browns have clinched the playoffs, but now we have to ask ourselves, what else is possible within the Browns' seeding of the playoffs for the rest of the year? And how realistic of a chance do the Browns actually have at the 1 seed, at the 2 seed, or at winning the division? Well, that's what this video is going to be about. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to hop into the playoff machine on ESPN. Now, I've already made some selections kind of just to make sure that I cut time and you're not seeing me kind of like pop through some selections here. So week 17, we go through these matchups, right? Now, Buffalo versus New England. I think we all agree Buffalo's probably going to win that game, right? Now, this Raiders-Colts game is interesting. This Panthers-Jaguars game is interesting. This Texans-Titans game is interesting because these are kind of the string of games that are going to really determine who the Browns face. Because remember, the Browns are likely only going to be, because let's see, if I give Buffalo another win, let's give Buffalo another win. Yeah, if I give Buffalo another win, and let's say Cleveland loses here, Cleveland still stays the 5 seed. So no matter what happens, if Buffalo wins, if Cleveland wins, the Browns will be the 5 seed. They're locked into the 5 seed. There's nothing that can take them out of the 5 seed. So what matters going forward is Baltimore, Miami. What happens with those 2 teams is that could dictate whether the Browns get the 1 seed or the 2 seed. Another thing that matters is what happens with the AFC South, because the way it's shaking out is that whoever wins the AFC South is probably playing the Cleveland Browns, with a small chance that the Kansas City Chiefs end up playing the Cleveland Browns. So let's go through it again. If Buffalo wins, if all 3 of the AFC South team wins, and then let's say Kansas City wins. Let's go with what we expect to happen, right? We all expect this to happen. And then let's say Baltimore loses, right? If Baltimore loses to Miami. So that's how the standings would shake out. And then we go to week 18. Again, some matches are already done here. You have Pittsburgh versus Baltimore. Now, obviously, if Baltimore loses and Cleveland wins, we are now the 1 seed. If Miami also loses, because if Miami wins against Buffalo, then Miami's the 1 seed. We are the 2 seed. If Miami, Cleveland, and Kansas City all win out, so let's say Kansas City wins out. I believe if Kansas City does win out, no, Kansas City can't tie with Cleveland. So Kansas City, the most they can get is 11 wins. Again, you know what that means. What that means is that Cleveland will be either 1 seed, 2 seed, 5 seed. All right. So that's how the Browns can get the 2 seed. If Miami wins, if Miami loses, the Browns then get the bye week. We are all pretty familiar with that scenario. Now let's move into a scenario where the Browns have the 5 seed and see what combinations of opponents will the Browns play if certain things play out. So let's go back here and let's say Baltimore loses this game, but they win the Baltimore game, right? And who knows who wins this game? Buffalo versus Miami. Doesn't really change anything seeding wise who wins it. So probably no starters will play in that game. All right. So let's get back to it and mess with some of these AFC South teams, right? Because let's say the Raiders pull off an upset here. That brings Houston to the 7th seed. Now, all Jacksonville needs to do to win the division, I believe, is win 1 game. Well, not win 1 game. They need to win out, basically, right? So if they win here and then Houston and Texan, the Houston and Indy play each other. So if Tennessee beats Jacksonville, then Jacksonville will lose the division and be the 7th seed, and we will either play the winner. We will play the winner of this game, Houston versus Indy. If Jacksonville wins that game, the winner of that game for the Cleveland Browns is irrelevant unless the Browns are the 2 seed. So going back to the beginning of the seeding of this video, it's interesting, right? Because what ends up mattering for the next 2 weeks for Cleveland Browns fans are about 5 games. So you're going to want to watch the result, obviously, of Miami versus Baltimore, because that decides if you have a chance at the division. If Miami wins, you have a chance at the division. If Miami loses, you don't have a chance at the division. You don't have a chance at the 1 seed. And then also when it comes to who you're going to play, whether you're playing the 2 seed or the 4 seed, or whether you're playing as the 2 seed against the 7 seed or as the 5 seed against the 4 seed, you will still have to go up against an AFC South opponent. So if the Raiders pull an upset here, and then the Jaguars, they should beat the Panthers. And then let's say the Titans play spoiler here against the Texans. Let's say chaos happens, right? Let's say all the AFC South teams lose out. Let's see what happens here. Well, you can't. It would still just come down to whoever wins this last week. So these 3 games right here are also important for Cleveland Browns, right? The Raiders playing the Colts on the road, the Panthers playing the Jaguars at home, and then the Texans playing the Titans at home. Texans have CJ Stroud back. Now, I think most of us would like to, well, not avoid. I think most of us would prefer playing the Jacksonville Jaguars, given how well the Browns matched up against them the last time that they played. So if you want to make sure that happens, all you need to have happen, and we can actually jump to a different thing here. So let's get to the New York Times board here to talk about some of this stuff, because I do think this is all very interesting, and look at the Jaguars stuff. So let's go Jacksonville Jaguars. All right. So right now, if we're looking at the Jaguars projection chart, they have a 50% chance, 58% chance to host the wild card. If they beat the Panthers, that turns to 71%. If they win out, they win the division, right? Now, if they if they win against the Titans, I believe that also pretty much seals it for them. There's like an outside chance that another team can win out. But they basically need to beat the Panthers and the Titans in order to clinch the division. But if they win one of these games, it becomes real likely that they clinch the division over here, right? Now, if they beat the Jaguars and the Colts lose to the Raiders, the percentages drop up. Or if the Texans lose to the Titans, obviously they clinch, right? So again, those 3 games are going to be important. It's important what happens with the AFC South title, because again, if the Browns make when the Browns have made the playoffs, so they're going to play either the 4 seed or the 7 seed in wild card weekend or have a bye week. And it looks like the way things are shaking up, that 4 seed or that 7 seed, well, the 4 seed or the 7 seed is likely going to be a AFC South team. Now let's see if we can make it so that the AFC North makes the playoffs, because right now I have both the Bengals and the Steelers at 8 and 9 for the rest of the year. Let's say the Bengals pull off an upset, and let's say the Steelers pull off an upset, and let's say they also pull off, well, then the Browns will have the bye week. But let's say the Bengals beat the Browns. Yeah, so right now it looks like only the Bengals can really make the playoffs, because the Bengals or the Steelers. So it's one or the other. If they both win out, things would have to go in their way significantly in order for them to make the playoffs. So I don't think you have to worry about playing an AFC North opponent, because I think the only way that happens is if you get the 2 seed. So you would at least have a home game. So again, you're probably playing the first place AFC South team or the second place AFC South team. Now, which one's a better draw? I don't know. CJ Stroud seems like a more difficult task than Trevor Lawrence. But also, if you are playing CJ Stroud because the Browns are the 2 seed and they're the 7, then you have a good chance that you're at home. Well, you're not a good chance. You're going to be at home. And if you're at home, all bets are off, because at the end of the day, it's still a rookie quarterback. Now, let's look at the other AFC North brethren here and see what their playoff odds are looking like, because I don't believe that they're great for them. So let's start with the Cincinnati Bengals, who have a 19% chance to make the playoffs as it stands currently. Now, if they beat the Chiefs, that jumps up to 45. If they win out, I believe it's about 75% chance that 91% chance that they make the playoffs if they went out, right? So if they lose to the Chiefs, which is likely, it drops down to a 5% chance. Even if they beat the Browns, well, if they lose to the Browns, they're done. If they beat the Browns, they have a small chance to make the playoffs, but they're likely out. So that's the Bengals odds there for the playoffs. If we go down to Pittsburgh, they have about a 12% chance to make the playoffs. If they lose against Seattle, it drops down to 5%. But if they beat Baltimore, I guess they have enough tiebreakers to kind of sneak in. So it's more likely that Pittsburgh sneaks in at the 7th seed than Cincinnati sneaks in at the 7th seed at this point, unless Cincinnati and Pittsburgh both went out. And if Cincinnati and Pittsburgh both went out, then it will be determined on whether Buffalo wins out, right? Because if Buffalo, yeah, okay. So that's another weird scenario that can happen, right? Let's say Cincinnati and Pittsburgh both went out, right? So Pittsburgh beats the Seahawks, it beats the Ravens, and then let's say the Ravens win this game versus the Dolphins. Then I think that the only scenario in which this happens, all 3 AFC North teams make the playoffs. The only scenario in which this happens is, if that happens, boom. So if Buffalo loses the next 2, I believe that's what's required. No, Buffalo only has to lose 1 of their next 2. So if Buffalo, Cincinnati, and Pittsburgh are all at 10-7, then that means that Cincinnati and Pittsburgh get the tiebreakers over those 2 teams, which means that all 4 AFC North teams will make the playoffs at 10-7, which is possible. I don't know. It will require the Chiefs having to lose out and a bunch of weird stuff happening there. But basically, if you're a fan for these next couple of weeks, you're going to want to watch the AFC South picture, the Baltimore Ravens, the Miami Dolphins, and the rest of the AFC North, which you're going to have to because you play them next week. So that's going to be, those are the real possibilities available to the Cleveland Browns. You're either playing Jacksonville or you get the 2 seed and you play an AFC South opponent. Now, this scenario where you play an AFC North opponent is kind of unlikely if you're the 2 seed, because let's say Cleveland wins here, but Baltimore loses here and the Browns get the 2 seed, then you just end up playing Buffalo if they're 10-7. There's not really a realistic possibility that you end up playing like this. Like, it would take the Patriots beating somebody or something like that. But that's another scenario. But I think the most realistic scenario going forward, if I had to pick these games based on what I truly believe is going to happen, I do think Miami will beat Baltimore this week. The Falcons, I think the Colts are probably going to win. I think the Jaguars are probably going to squeak this one out, and I think the Texans are going to win here, right? I think Seattle's going to win this game, and I think Kansas City's going to win, and probably the Chargers here. And then in week 18, I'm going to go with the Seahawks, probably Baltimore, I'll go with Tampa Bay on this one. I think Cleveland still wins that last game versus Cincinnati, even though it doesn't really matter if they do or not, right? They lose, they win. It doesn't really affect anything for both sides. The Colts, I don't think the Colts beat them. Yeah, I think the Colts probably lose here. And then the Kansas City, Dallas, probably Jaguars, and then the Jets. I think the Jets probably win that one. And then what happens here if that shakeup happens? This would be interesting to watch for seeding too. Another interesting thing for seeding is not just what's going to happen for the first round, right? Because the Browns being the five seed is interesting. So the way the playoffs work in NFL is they reseed. So if the Browns beat the Jaguars and the Kansas City Chiefs beat the Buffalo Bills and the Miami Dolphins beat the Houston Texans, the Browns will play the Baltimore Ravens in the second round of the playoffs because the Browns will be the lowest seeded team available. Now, if the Browns beat the Jaguars and Buffalo beats Kansas City and Houston beats Miami, then something interesting happens, which is, okay, Houston ends up playing Baltimore. The Browns will play Buffalo in Cleveland because they're the higher seeded team. And if the Browns beat Buffalo and somehow Houston beats Baltimore, the Browns will host the AFC Championship game. Or if Buffalo beats Kansas City, Houston loses to Miami, and Cleveland beats Jacksonville, then Buffalo will play Baltimore, Cleveland will play Miami, and if Buffalo beats Baltimore and Cleveland beats Miami, Cleveland will host the AFC Championship game. So being the 5 seed gives you the first chance at getting an unlikely home game if you're the Cleveland Browns, because all you need to have happen is one upset to go down, and you play the team that got the upset. But that's how things rock out. So if you're the Browns and you want to avoid playing Baltimore in the second round, but maybe you want to play Miami or something, or if you're the Browns and you're trying to find a way to make it so that you play to the Kansas City Chiefs in the second round, right? If you can find a way to do that, how would you have that happen? You'll probably want the 7th seed to win. You'll probably want Kansas City to beat Buffalo and the Browns to beat Jacksonville. If that happens, Houston would play Baltimore. Cleveland would play Kansas City. Cleveland could beat Kansas City and then play Baltimore, but you won't get a home game that way unless Houston beats Baltimore. So those are all the scenarios. I hope that this video kind of clarified some things, made sense for y'all. If you want to see the percentages, let's go ahead and, before we leave out, see the percentages of the Browns' chances to win the division based on what happens. Now, if the Browns beat the Bengals, that means that they have a 5% chance to either get a bye week or host a wild card game. And then if the Dolphins win, all of a sudden that jumps up to a 14% chance to host a wild card game or have a bye week. And then obviously, if the Browns beat the Bengals and the Steelers beat the Ravens, then the Browns have a very high chance to have then they have a 46% chance of getting the bye week and a 54% chance of getting the wild card. And then if the Bills beat the Dolphins, then the Browns will get the bye week. And just so you guys we can do the playoff bracket if the Browns get the bye week. So let's say everything that needs to happen for the Browns to get the bye week happens, right? The Bills beat the Dolphins, but the Dolphins beat the Ravens and the Browns went out. So right here, what did I not have in? Oh, the Browns are at 11-6. So I didn't have the Browns winning against. There it is. All right. And then Baltimore loses here. So if the Browns get the 1 seed, right? Let's say that shakes out. Then the Browns would play the lowest seeded winner. So if Miami beats Houston, if Buffalo beat Kansas City, if Baltimore beat Jacksonville, or if Jacksonville beat Baltimore, the Browns would play the lowest seeded team. So in this scenario, I think Buffalo would probably maybe beat Kansas City. I don't know. I don't really trust Buffalo that much. Houston versus Miami. I would go Houston probably loses to Miami. So Miami would play. If Kansas City won, they would play Kansas City. If Baltimore wins, the Browns would play Baltimore, and so on and so forth. But the difference would be that the Browns will have home seed. You can do this a bunch of different ways, but that's what you need to watch. That's what can break down. That's what can go down for the Cleveland Browns. Thank you guys for watching this video. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.